Southern Mesopotamia, around 3400 BC. A reed-walled settlement on the banks of the Euphrates. The air is thick with river silt and heat, marshland stretching in every direction, the kind of terrain where building anything permanent should take generations of trial and error. But inside these walls, someone is pressing a wedge-shaped stylus into wet clay, recording grain inventories in a script that has no known ancestor, no proto-writing phase, no half-formed pictographs evolving over centuries into abstract symbols. Cuneiform, one of the most complex writing systems ever invented, appears in the archaeological record as if switched on. And it arrives alongside mathematics, a legal code, formalized astronomy, surgical medicine, and a bureaucratic apparatus sophisticated enough to manage a city of tens of thousands. Sumer doesn't crawl into history, it walks in fully dressed. The comfortable consensus calls this the Sumerian miracle, a term that sounds like praise, but functions as a wall, because behind that word is a question nobody wants to answer. Where did the package come from? And to understand how impossible that question really is, you need to see what came before, and what didn't. 12,000 years ago, southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. The hilltop air is dry and thin, the soil hard-packed under a sun that hasn't changed in 12 millennia. Beneath the surface, massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 15 tons, arranged in precise circles, decorated with relief carvings of foxes, scorpions, vultures, and serpents that required planning, coordination, and engineering knowledge no hunter-gatherer society was supposed to possess. Carbon dating puts it at 9,600 BC, older than pottery, older than agriculture, older than any known permanent settlement. Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who led the excavation from 1995 until his death in 2014, called it the world's first temple. And here's what makes it worse. The site was deliberately buried. Schmidt's team found evidence that the entire complex was intentionally filled with rubble and soil. Someone went to enormous effort to hide it. It changes the timeline. It proves that organized construction, artistic expression, large-scale labor coordination, and possibly deliberate archiving existed thousands of years before the accepted beginning of civilization. And then, silence. After Göbekli Tepe, the archaeological record goes quiet. Not a slow decline, a gap. Millennia of almost nothing. No monumental architecture, no complex writing, no formalized knowledge systems. Until Sumer appears around 3400 BC. 6,000 years of darkness. Think about that for a second. Göbekli Tepe proves that humans were capable of extraordinary organization 12,000 years ago. And then, for 6 millennia, that capacity vanishes from the record. No intermediate steps, no half-built temples, no proto-cuneiform scratched into cave walls. Just a gap, and then a full package. What happened during those 6,000 years? The geological record shows no extinction event, no comet impact, no mega-eruption that would wipe out knowledge for 6,000 years. The people survived. The knowledge didn't. Or it went somewhere we haven't looked yet. The Sumerians had their own explanation, and they wrote it down. The Sumerian King List. A clay prism. The best-known copy is the Weld-Blundell prism, now sitting in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. When researchers first translated it in the early 20th century, the numbers stopped them cold. The list records every king who ruled Sumer, from the beginning of kingship to the historical dynasties.
The early entries, the ones labeled before the flood, list 8 kings who ruled for a combined total of 241,200 years. Let's look at the numbers. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, ruled for 28,800 years. Alulgar, his successor, 36,000. Dumuzid of Bad Tibira, 36,000. Each reign measured in tens of thousands of years. And then, a dividing line. The flood swept over. After the flood, the reigns collapsed to human scale. Hundreds of years, then decades, then what looks like normal lifespans. The transition is sudden, not gradual. The accepted answer is metaphor, symbolic numbers, ritual exaggeration. Fine. But here's what that answer doesn't explain. The post-flood portion of the King List has been independently verified by cross-referencing it with archaeological evidence from Ur, Kish, and Lagash. When the King List says Dynasty of Ur, the dynasty existed. When it says Etana of Kish, Etana's name appears on separate tablets. The historical part is accurate. So we're asked to believe that the same document is mythology in one half and history in the other, and the dividing line happens to be a global flood that appears in over 200 cultures worldwide. Not a dismissal, a question. If the historical part checks out, what does that say about the pre-flood numbers? And the flood itself. The dividing line didn't originate in the Bible. It came from something 1,000 years older. Nineveh, 1853. The air inside Ashurbanipal's buried palace smells of damp clay and centuries of stillness. Hormuzd Rassam, an Assyrian archaeologist working for the British Museum, is excavating the library of the last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Inside, buried under rubble, 12 clay tablets. When George Smith translated them in 1872, the result was a sensation that shook Victorian England. Smith was so overcome that, according to contemporary accounts, he began undressing in the middle of the British Museum reading room. Tablet 11 contained a flood narrative that predated the book of Genesis by at least 1,000 years. A man named Utnapishtim, warned by a god named Ea, builds a vessel with precise dimensions. The text specifies length, width, and height, loads it with animals and his family, survives a catastrophic deluge that lasts 6 days and 7 nights, and sends out birds to find land. First a dove, then a swallow, then a raven. He lands on Mount Nisir. He offers a sacrifice. The parallels with Noah are not vague, they're structural. The warning, the vessel, the dimensions, the animals, the birds, the mountain, the sacrifice. Every major plot point matches, and the Gilgamesh version adds a detail Genesis omits. The gods gather like flies around the sacrifice because they've been starving without human offerings during the flood. Not bad for a pagan myth written 10 centuries before Genesis was composed. The 12 tablets, the Epic of Gilgamesh, are real. They sit in the British Museum today. Anyone can request to see them. And the flood account in Tablet 11 names its source, a being who was present before humans existed. But the Sumerians recorded something else on clay, something that, if taken at face value, suggests they knew the layout of the solar system. Berlin, Vorderasiatisches Museum, Cylinder Seal VA243. A small Akkadian cylinder seal, roughly 4,500 years old, carved with a scene that has divided scholars for decades. In the upper left corner of the impression, a 6-pointed star surrounded by smaller dots. Zechariah Sitchin, in his 1976 book, The 12th Planet,
identified the star as the Sun and the dots as planets, including bodies that weren't discovered until modern telescopes were invented. Neptune, discovered in 1846. Pluto, classified in 1930.
If Sitchin's reading is correct, the Akkadians mapped the solar system 4,000 years before Galileo turned a lens toward Jupiter. The academic response was predictable. It's not a solar system diagram. The star is a common Mesopotamian religious symbol. The dots are other stars, not planets. Michael Heiser, a scholar of ancient Semitic languages, published a detailed rebuttal arguing that the seal's iconography follows standard Mesopotamian celestial conventions and that Sitchin misidentified the shapes. Fair point. Let's test it against the data. But here's the detail neither side addresses cleanly. Sumerian astronomical texts, separate from VA 243, describe celestial bodies with a precision that doesn't match a civilization supposedly limited to naked-eye observation. They tracked the movements of Venus with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched until the Renaissance. They calculated the length of the year to within minutes of modern measurements. They described the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle of approximately 25,920 years caused by the slow wobble of Earth's axis. A cycle so long that you would need centuries of continuous, precise observation to detect it. Not one generation, not 10, centuries. Where did that data come from? The seal is debatable. The astronomical knowledge is not. It's documented, it's measurable, and it has no precedent in any earlier culture. And the Sumerians didn't just describe the heavens, they described who came from them and what those beings wanted. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, composed on 7 tablets based on older Sumerian sources. The core narrative, a race of beings called the Anunnaki, descend. They need workers. The labor is brutal, digging, carrying, building. And even among the Anunnaki, the lower-ranking Igigi revolt. They refuse to work. Not subtly, they burn their tools and surround the dwelling of Enlil, the chief administrator. A labor crisis. Sound familiar? The solution comes from Enki, the Anunnaki's engineer, the one the texts associate with water, knowledge, and craftsmanship. Enki proposes creating a being, a Lulu Amelu, a mixed worker, by combining the essence of an existing earth creature with the blood of a sacrificed god. Ninhursag, the birth goddess, performs the procedure. 14 clay figures are shaped, 7 male, 7 female, the first generation of humans. This isn't a parable about the human condition. The text reads like a production protocol. Problem: labor shortage. Proposal: engineer a worker. Method: biological combination. Execution: specialist performs procedure. Output: workers. If you strip the divine terminology and read the Enuma Elish as a technical document, which is exactly what its structure suggests, it describes genetic engineering in operational terms. We're not required to believe it. But we are required to notice that a civilization with no known predecessor wrote it down, on clay, in cuneiform, and stored it in temple libraries as foundational knowledge. And the texts specify where the Anunnaki put those workers and what they were mining. The Sumerian word is Abzu, translated variously as the deep or the abyss, but in context, the texts associate it with a specific geographical direction, south, far south. The beings who needed gold sent their workers to dig it from the earth. Now, Mpumalanga Province, South Africa. In the 1970s and 1980s, Geological surveys documented thousands of ancient mine shafts scattered across the region, some descending over 15 meters into the earth, carved through hard dolomite rock. Anglo-American Corporation, the South African mining conglomerate, commissioned dating studies on several of these sites. The results were published in the journal Optima in 1970. Some of the mines dated to over 100,000 years ago. 100,000 years. The oldest known mining operations on Earth. And what were they mining? Gold. The academic explanation: early Homo sapiens used the gold for ritual purposes, as body paint, decoration. But here's the engineering problem no one addresses. These aren't surface scrapes. They're engineered shafts with ventilation channels, support structures, and extraction tunnels that go deep into solid rock. The effort required to dig through dolomite with stone tools is staggering. The geological record shows that these operations were sustained over thousands of years. Who organizes a mining operation sustained over millennia? For body paint? That's like building a nuclear reactor to charge a phone. The scale of effort doesn't match the stated purpose. The Sumerian texts say gold was needed by the Anunnaki in large quantities, extracted from the earth, in a land to the south. The South African mines say someone was extracting gold over 100,000 years ago at industrial scale. The geography matches. The mineral matches. The timeline is impossible by conventional standards. And the connection has never been formally studied, not confirmed, not refuted, simply ignored. But before you accept this, or reject it, you need to understand the man who connected these dots, and where his work holds up, and where it cracks. Zechariah Sitchin, born in Baku, raised in Palestine, educated at the London School of Economics. Not an archaeologist, not a linguist, an economist who taught himself Sumerian and spent 40 years building a framework. The Anunnaki were real. Nibiru was their planet. Humans were their creation. His 1976 book, The 12th Planet, launched a genre. 14 books followed. Millions of copies sold. The academic establishment dismissed him, sometimes fairly, sometimes reflexively. Here's what he got wrong. His translation of Nibiru as a specific undiscovered planet with a 3,600-year orbit has no support in the cuneiform texts. Sumerian scholars, including Benno Landsberger at the University of Chicago and, more recently, Michael Heiser, have shown that Nibiru, in the original context, refers to a crossing point, not a planetary body. His reading of VA243 as a solar system diagram is, as we saw, contested. Some of his etymological connections are forced. He sometimes merged texts from different periods and traditions as if they were a single continuous account. That matters. Here's what he got right, or at least what the evidence supports independently of his interpretation. The tablets are real. They sit in museums in London, Berlin, Philadelphia, Baghdad. The Enuma Elish exists. The King List exists. The flood account predates Genesis. Sumerian astronomical knowledge is anomalous. And the connection between Sumerian texts about southern gold extraction and 100,000-year-old mines in South Africa was never addressed by mainstream archaeology before or after Sitchin raised it. Dismiss Sitchin if you want, but the tablets don't vanish with him. And what's written on those tablets, the knowledge encoded in Sumerian mathematics, astronomy, and geometry, is the part that cannot be argued away. Base 60. The Sumerians didn't use base 10 like us. They built their entire mathematical system on base 60,
and it survives today in every clock, every compass, every circle divided into 360 degrees. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees, all Sumerian. But base 60 isn't intuitive. Base 10 makes sense, we have 10 fingers. Base 60 requires an understanding of divisibility that belongs in a university mathematics department, not in a river valley civilization that supposedly just invented writing.
60 is divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. It's the smallest number divisible by every integer from 1 to 6. The Sumerians didn't stumble into this. They chose the most mathematically efficient base available and built a civilization around it. And they didn't stop there. The YBC 7289 tablet, held at Yale's Babylonian collection, shows the square root of 2 calculated to 6 decimal places, 1.414213. The modern value is 1.4142135. The error is less than 1 millionth. The Plimpton 322 tablet, also at Yale, contains a table of Pythagorean triples, integer solutions to the equation a squared plus b squared equals c squared. 15 rows, multiple columns, organized with a sophistication that mathematician Eleanor Robson at the University of Oxford calls one of the most remarkable mathematical documents from any ancient civilization. This is the Pythagorean theorem, 1,200 years before Pythagoras was born. Based on the analysis, the Sumerians weren't discovering these relationships by accident. Plimpton 322 is organized as a reference table, implying routine use. They were doing trigonometry as standard practice while the rest of the world was still building mud huts. And then, precession. We mentioned it earlier. The 25,920-year cycle. The Sumerians encoded it in their astronomical texts and their temple measurements. The number 72, 1 degree of precessional shift, appears across Sumerian mathematical and astronomical texts with a frequency that cannot be accidental. Cross-referencing these findings with the archaeological record shows the same number appearing at Angkor, at Giza, at Teotihuacan. Either every ancient civilization independently discovered the same obscure astronomical constant, or they had a common source. The knowledge is real. Every number is verifiable. Every tablet sits under glass in a museum you can visit. The mathematics doesn't care who translated it or what theory you attach to it. Base 60 works. The Pythagorean triples are correct. The precession numbers match modern calculations. The astronomical observations are accurate to a degree that required centuries of data no one can account for. The Sumerians said they were taught. They named the teachers. They described what they wanted and where they worked. They recorded it on clay that has survived 5,000 years in the ground. We don't have to believe the story, but we owe it intellectual honesty, because the knowledge that story claims to explain is sitting in museums, carved in stone, and waiting for someone to ask the right question. Not, were the Anunnaki real? That question closes doors. The better one, the one that keeps me up, is simpler. Where did a civilization with no predecessors, no learning curve, and no intermediate steps get mathematical precision that took the rest of the world another 2,000 years to match? I have spent more time with these tablets than I'm comfortable admitting, and the more I read, the less the comfortable consensus holds together. The answer might be human. It might be something we haven't imagined yet.
But the question is real, and the tablets are patient. They've been waiting 5,000 years for someone to read them as what they are. Not mythology, not fairy tales, but the closest thing we have to a user manual left behind by whoever switched the lights on. The Sumerians named them Anunnaki, gave them roles, hierarchies, conflicts.
But there's another text, older in its origins, more specific in its details, more dangerous in its implications. It names 200 beings, gives each one a specialty: metallurgy, astronomy, medicine, herbalism, warfare. And in the 4th century, someone removed it from the biblical canon. Next, the Book of Enoch, and the question that follows it: who erased it and why?